Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing a book review on The Architect's Apprentice by Elif Safak. This is a historical fiction novel. It takes place in 1500s Turkey during the height of the Ottoman Empire. You are following, at the beginning of this novel, this young Indian boy named Jahan. He arrives in Istanbul with this white elephant named Chota, who ends up being a gift for the Sultan, and Jahan ends up becoming the elephant's caretaker, and you are basically just following his life over the course of many decades. You see him sort of just growing up and maturing, and it's just kind of like a coming-of-age novel. Elif Safak is considered one of Turkey's best writers, and after reading this novel, I definitely understand why. One of the main selling points, or the biggest pros to this book, is just the writing in here. It's so beautiful. As I mentioned in my July wrap-up, I quoted this book so many times on my Tumblr because there are so many ideas, and just the turns of phrase were just so great that I couldn't resist. I think this is my most quoted book currently on Tumblr. In my wrap-up, I also mentioned that this book reminded me a lot of The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I think that's mainly just because the writing style, partially, but also because when you're in this world, at least for me, it felt like being in another world. The way that you're hearing about the sultans and these rulers, and just seeing Jahan growing up and learning about the world and learning about different people, the way different people act, the way that everything's not always really fair. This book kind of does remind me a little bit of a fantasy novel without all of the sort of fantasy aspects, or at least a more literary fantasy novel like Patrick Rothfuss. So I feel like if you like The Name of the Wind, you would probably like this book. It's really interesting just following Jahan growing up. This isn't necessarily a heavy plot novel, so if you're someone who likes a lot of action or requires just a heavy, fast-paced plot to keep you going, this is probably not the book for you. This is definitely more of just a character story, just following these characters growing up over the years. They're characters you're introduced to at the beginning of the novel that you hear about later on, and you get to see all these different threads and all these different connections being made. There's also just this really interesting relationship that happens between Jahan and Chota that I just really enjoyed. They kind of are friends. There are aspects of Chota that makes it seem like the elephant can actually really understand and respond to specifically Jahan, but also some of the other situations that are happening in this book. The way that Jahan sort of confides in this elephant and treats him like a friend and sort of relies on him, and you see especially towards the end of the book how much that this elephant meant to Jahan, which is just really, really beautiful. One of the other things that I really liked about this book is the fact that this is historical fiction and this is taking place in the Ottoman Empire, and a lot of the people that are referenced in here are real people. The sultans are all real, and the timeline is, approximately real. There's also an architect in here, hence the title, named Sinan, who is an actual architect who worked in Turkey and built a lot of really famous, really beautiful mosques. If you Google the mosques that are mentioned in here, or you Google just the architect in general, you'll see that the author is referencing real things that have happened. There's also another famous architect that is mentioned in this book that most people will probably recognize. I'm pretty sure everyone would recognize because he's quite well known in the Western world. And so that was just sort of a nice little nugget. I imagine that if you're extremely well known of Turkish architecture, it might seem like the story is a little bit contrived because there are a lot of situations that Jahan is put in, or a lot of famous people or famous buildings that he gets to experience that feels a little bit like the author is just purposely pulling things that the audience would recognize, but I mostly just saw it as being just fun callbacks and things like that. In the end, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. This isn't a perfect book, but I think it's just so beautifully written, and I think that the characters just go through so much growth and change, and you get to see a wide variety of people in this book that I really, really enjoyed it. Sometimes the pacing's a little off. Some parts of the story were a lot more interesting to me than other parts, but I like the way that the author integrated this fictional story into the real world. I liked experiencing this world, which is not necessarily a country that I read about very often, or even a time that I read about very often. It was also just really cool Googling things as I was reading the book and looking up what was actually real and what's actually known about these people and these buildings and things like that. So I definitely recommend this book, particularly if you're someone who likes historical fiction, because I think that this is totally worth the read, and I'm definitely going to look up more books by this author. So yeah, those are my quick thoughts on The Architect's Apprentice by Elif Safak. If you've read this book, feel free to leave a comment down below letting me know what you guys thought of it. Or if you've read any of her other books, or if you have any questions about this book particularly, you can always leave that down in the comment section as well. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.